Hey everyone, we're back with another episode of the Edge podcast for CHROs. My name is Varun. I've got Nisha, my co-host. Thanks again for being a part of this journey. We're 12 episodes in, which is one tiny episode away from closing season one, and the response has been pretty good, very encouraging as well. Which is why we've already been putting a lot of interesting elements in the cauldron of season two. With a lot of things which we'll be announcing soon on our social media handles. So let me quickly run you through what we did in our previous episode, and I'll quickly introduce Arjun, who is our guest tonight. And I think we'll get cracking on tonight's episode. So last episode was one of our longest episodes, but also one of our most fun episodes. I think that we've me and Nisha have shot. So we spoke with Rohit from Razorpay, and we ran through a very sensitive topic called payroll, which a lot of people again hesitate to speak. I know why. So we helped deconstruct a lot of nuances around that. Rohit, especially with the kind of operator experience that he brought in, really helped HRs, build on some sort of, first principles thinking on how they can really start developing this uh, jobs to be done mindset, as I call it, right? So it's been pretty fun. Be sure to check that episode out. And also, I get that the episodes are long and that's intentional, and me and Nisha have regularly conveyed why it is so. Feel free to use the timestamps in all the YouTube channels, including this video as well, to navigate any of the chapters that you find interesting. So let me quickly introduce Arjun as well. Arjun is a founder and chief executive officer at Edge Networks. He has 16 years of experience in sales and management, and he has used to build the Edge, a future focused startup. Arjun's startup focuses on helping organizations solve for suboptimal talent management challenges. Edge builds an end-to-end talent management products for organizations so that they have a 360-degree view of the talent supply chain. This helps them make informed, talent-driven decisions more efficiently and build an intelligent workforce as well. So under his leadership, Edge is recognized by Gartner, Deloitte, NVIDIA, NASCOM, and Google's Launchpad. So prior to the Edge, he has worked with organizations such as Speedera, Networks, and Akamai Technologies. He built their India and international businesses. He headed the sales divisions at Dexler Information Solutions. In terms of pedigree, Arjun holds a PG degree in Information Systems and International Business from the University of Sydney, Australia. So to give you a quick context of the episode before I let Nisha and Arjun take the floor, one of the reasons me and Nisha sort of decided that this would be a very interesting topic to talk about is essentially the fact that top executives are looking to hire a self-driven and a more productive workforce, which is sort of what I see that's going to be happening for the rest of this decade. Emotional intelligence and all of those softer skills taking more precedence over a lot of other hard skills. And recruitment could be a this sort of linchpin, right? That could help HRs and CHROs gain visibility around the attributes that increase the success ratio of individuals, primarily, which is relevant to um, the company culture and industry dynamics. So stay tuned for the rest of the episode. Nisha, please welcome our guest as well. And Arjun, feel free to introduce yourself too. I think our audience would like to hear everything that you've done from the horse's mouth as well. So
No, absolutely. And I'll just take it away from there. Thank you so much, Varun and Nisha, for having me on this channel and this episode. I think it's a very exciting topic, primarily because I've been in the thick of it. As you can see, my repertoire of experiences in sales and marketing, but with technology companies. And I've been in startups all my life. The first large company was by an acquisition, by virtue of an acquisition, Akamai Technologies, and they sort of power close to 40 odd percent of the internet traffic globally. So it was a great learning experience across these journeys. And that sort of fundamentally got me to understanding recruitment challenges, talent challenges, because you constantly face it, right? And the most unpredictable piece of the puzzle is the human being. We continue to face it across, situations that challenge us constantly. I think the universe has a way of throwing things at us that we need to figure out. And I think companies and talent essentially are a perennial sort of situation that companies face in terms of productivity and performance. And I'm in the thick of things, so I love what I'm doing. I've been a single founder. I have a great team who have hung around despite my insanities and different pivots. I think building startups and building companies is not just a journey of passion; it's also a journey of commitment, a journey of diligence. I have a lot of learning through my many missteps, like most startups feel. And I think it's just important to also realize that it's about talent. Everything is about talent. I feel so connected to people through my journey. Thank you so much for having me here. And Nisha, I'm going to hand it over to you to pepper me with questions. I obviously have a lot to say in this regard, but I'll leave it up to you to guide me through this.
Thank you, Arjun. Thanks for coming, and thanks for saying that you have a lot to say, because this topic isn't an easy one. And we were hoping that we should, between Varun and I, should let you into a secret. We were thinking that we should put you in a spot as much as we can. So hope we can do that.
I mean, there will be some
Oh,
sincere
too
evil
bad,
attempts
too
to put
bad
you
you
on the
said that.
spots. I mean,
Well,
We were trying to be really kind.
I have a way of leading myself into these spots. So anyway, let's go for it.
Okay, so Arjun, this whole thing about AI in recruitment, right? I think it possibly, like we just said, it has some of the most controversies really attached to it. But I also think that from your end, if you are building something as powerful as edge networks, right? Where do you see this headed, and what is the gold standard to you? That's one part of the question. But also, because I did cover this sometime back and I did speak to your team then, I remember we also said that, this hasn't really reached where it is supposed to reach, right? So where is this currently headed? If you can answer this two-part question, one is the gold standard, but where have we reached?
Yeah, so
In
AI in recruitment, and we started this company in 2012. At that time, being in India and selling to IT services companies, because they were, companies that hire in large volumes, and the Wipros and the HCLs of the world, who are our customers. We found that for data sets and building the science around it, building a super cool and smart skill repository was very important for us to be able to produce the AI and use the AI effectively. And obviously leverage data science to its ultimate to look at the patterns, right? I think that part of it was one of, at the time, probably difficult for people to consume, because AI was also new in that sense in this space. And we pioneered a few things like automatic sourcing, where you could read a job description, create a Boolean query from it, fire it to a job board, download the resume from the job board, read those resumes, score and stack rank it, which normally a recruiter does. Right now, we were automating these processes that took so much time and were repetitive in nature to make it super efficient in terms of the automation itself, but it had to be efficient in terms of the accuracy, right? And then you have the resume and the job description itself, which can be difficult to understand because they might be incorrect, right? The resumes might be not representative of the person's skills, competencies, their experiences, and what they can bring to the table. And so can the job description be erroneous, right? It can be loosely constructed, and what they're actually looking for is not understood by the job description, because the hiring manager depicts it to the HR department, and they release it, and the recruiter sort of understands it in that loosely coupled fashion, and then goes out and says, you know what, I got to be looking for something else once I have a conversation with the hiring manager. So all of these things at the time when we were going through also had its barriers to entry. And to answer your first part of the question, whether it's the gold standard, it has become de facto and relevant in terms of providing the value. So when I look at customers today, they understand all the parts of the puzzle. So the questions are very spot on and relevant in any part of the world, right? We're looking at people coming back to us and asking us very relevant, clear questions to really sweat the product and come back to, okay, here's the value proposition, because I want to sort of be able to reduce my time to hire. I want to help recruiters manage much higher volumes of candidates. I want to reduce my number of interviews that I run. I want to qualify candidates much more quickly. I want a reduction in my cost per hire. So these are normal things that have come through the gates, right? So the standard has started becoming effective in terms of, yes, I want more effective technology to help me along this process, because I think we need to address the problem, right? The problem is that recruitment is one of the largest markets out there, which is why you have most of the companies who are in this space focusing on the recruitment domain, because it hasn't been solved with the amount of effectiveness one would want out of artificial intelligence and technology. So it is still a large market. It's still a large problem to solve. And I wouldn't say it's only because of the technology companies not bringing and efficiency or effectiveness to the table, it's also a lot to do with the processes that the technology relies on to solve for itself, right? That has to improve. The job descriptions have to become a lot more real, and technology is going to help that also, and it's helping it right now. The resumes have to become a lot more clear. The ecosystems that profile owners contribute to have to become a lot more accessible, so you can start collating this information, cross-referencing it, cross-validating it, and coming out with information that the recruiter can use very quickly, the hiring manager can use very intelligently, the interview panel can use very intelligently, and then you can get a qualified, verified candidate to come in. What are you trying to do at the end of the day? You're trying to crack that puzzle that allows you to get the right talent to come in at the right time, at the right cost, primarily because you want productivity and performance, right? You want people to come into a culture that you embody, and hence the person coming in is walking into something that they know. And how do you make sure that that match comes in? So parts of what the technology plays and parts of what technology always was going to do is try to solve those pieces of it. And the companies that start getting end-to-end pieces of it because of the amount of lag data that's available, in spite of the noise that is in that lag data, they come in with intuitive solutions that provide you lead indicators that help you, make the best choice.
Thank you, Arjun. Since you've mentioned that, I think it's only obvious for us to now ask you, if you can describe the product a little bit. And you mentioned customers ask you intelligent questions. Can you tell us what are those questions as well, and what are some of those discussions like?
Yeah. So what is an intelligent question? So an unintelligent question is that if your product is going to read these resumes in X amount of time, right? Is it really going to be that efficient, or is it going to do that? And when I say that's an unintelligent question, no offense to the people asking the question, but in reality, technology, when you come in and say, listen, I can read 10,000 resumes in 7 seconds, I can read 100,000 in 500 milliseconds. So you're basically coming in because technology can compute that much faster, right? So what is an intelligent question? An intelligent question is, what is your accuracy rate? What is your pass rate? What is your relevancy? What do these filters do? How do they measure? If you've got a performance filter or cost filter or a availability filter, how do you access that data, and how do you prevent the noise coming in, right? Because people want to know, what are you coming in with? Because there are at least 7 of these companies out there who promise reduction in cost per hire, reduction in time to hire, reduction in your number of resumes you view, and to shortlist conversion, right? So I think what they are doing now is they understand that you come in with these bells and whistles as the offering, right? But how do you do it, and how can you show me an example? So what do people do today? They don't look at your PowerPoint presentation to say, I've looked at 34 million resumes and profiles, and you've got 11 million job descriptions, and I've got 3 million validated data sets for recruitment alone, and Bing has 11 million for all of search. So yeah, they're a really cool company. So where's the dotted line? Nobody is doing that. They are going straight into, yeah, I like that presentation, but just limit the presentation. Let's see the product, right? They want to get into the product. They want to see the flow. They want to see the user experience. So it's nimble enough. So when they're giving it to their user base, when the buyer is looking at it and evaluating, if I want to spend, X amount of dollars on this, I want a user experience that makes sense in this flow, right? I want to solve all these problems, which everybody says they're solving. I want to see whether you've actually got some of these things that are important for me that I would give to my recruiter. And then I will start gauging you on a proof of concept, whether you can do this one and you can do this differently. So so my answer is that they actually sweat the product. They look at it, they make sense of it. The first meeting is really about putting the product out front. It's no more about giving you presentations about the company and how many customers that you have.
Okay.
Makes sense. So let's dive a little deeper into what AI in hiring and this entire recruitment space really does, right? And one of the things that uh, I'm sort of curious to understand, right? There's been an upward trend among, all startups and basically everybody across the market, right? Mid-market companies and everybody above that as well. That pedigree is not as important in hiring anymore, right? And I personally believe by that fact as well too. So a certain thinking process, a mixed bag of generalist and specialist skills, and emotional intelligence, and all those things expected today. So how does AI essentially predict winning behaviors, or like how does it help filter out even at the bare minimum level, like which candidate might be worth talking to and which might not be, like, and what are some of the cues? Essentially what I'm trying to get at is, what are some of the cues that humans weren't as good as identifying that AI is better at identifying, to essentially arrive at the winning goal of identifying this winning behavior, these winning top quartile performers and exceptionally good cultural people?
No, no, absolutely. So one is the heuristics of the inside are very important. A lot of companies go in to provide you a solution or a capability that gives you a lens. So, for instance, a company like Entelo will give you a view of multiple other pieces of data. So it makes it easy for the recruiter to see LinkedIn information or Git information or Stack Overflow information. So there's a view, right? So you can make sense of it. But it's more about descriptive intelligence. When you talk about AI performing a job where it's starting to help you on the inference caliber, see, some of the differences are you want to make sure that you're moving people at a verified level. So it's a qualified candidate. The AI verifies that these pieces fit together, right? Now, part of it is where we have a graph at the back end, a knowledge graph that sits and has categories, a taxonomy that looks at demographic information, industry information, and the proxy for industries would be a set of companies, right? Skills, which is a broad term for a competency, a plan, an output, a principle, a discipline, right? And you then have courses and certifications. Then you would have an occupation, which in the real world is a title, but it has a role that is connected to that title. And people have role architectures in their companies which define bands of people for compensation and proficiency, right? So, for instance, we have a career architecture that allows us to connect to the career architecture, the role architecture, which they call the role master in a lot of companies. And we connect the role master and the skill master because it's defined in a company to the intelligence that we have gathered. Now, when you connect the two, what are you trying to do? You're trying to then start using the power of inference on the clusters that you have or specific sets of skill to then say, okay, compound the level of proficiency that you can gauge basis the AI's advantage of doing that like this. I can go and get you 12 associated skills in my understanding that the person will have if they have these 3 skills. Now, if they've got 7 skills, them having these 7 skills together, it does not seem manageable in that time period, right? So then you start decaying the value of what the person is representing, because then you start seeing something that's been misrepresented. So this validation is done because you also see that you will see a pattern, and that pattern is based on some of the heuristics of the insight. You find that when you talk about culture and competency sort of as words, culture of an organization is basis what an organization will want to represent itself by, right? Some of the signals of that culture is the association of the partners, vendors, customers that organization goes with, and specifically the segment that they're in, right? Are they a large enterprise, a very large enterprise, a medium-sized enterprise? They have certain companies that compete, and they probably hire from those companies because of commonalities. Then you start getting a sense of these signals being important. Some of these signals are also about what I don't want to do. Now, how do you, for instance, when you do diversity and inclusion, you ask people certain questions that might be invasive, but how do you build a diverse culture, right? How do you build a diverse workforce? By only asking those questions, right? You need to understand the gender, the ethnicity, the background, to say that I want a more inclusive workforce and I want a more diverse workforce by asking those questions. So some of this is also based on the repetitive feedback loops that recruiters and hiring managers demonstrate, and the lag data or the in the organization that you collect, you attach back to the graph. See, so when we started out, we were a read a job description, create a Boolean query, fire it to the job board, download the resumes, score the resumes, basis reading of the resumes. So natural language processing and this bag of words, which is very cool, right? We were one of the, I think, the first company that pioneered auto sourcing in the world. Now, when we did that, we realized that we struck on a problem that hit a lot of companies about internal mobility. And IT services is all about moving resources because it directly correlates to billing. Now, they were doing it on role, skill, location combination. They still do it on role, skill, location combinations, right? And why do they do it on that? Because proximity, geography, on-site, offshore mixes, contribution margin, employee cost of revenue, various parameters. So it became the holy grail for us to be able to understand what that meant for us to look at the insight. The insight is about recognizing these verified and qualified candidates. Beautiful data sets, right? A lot of it might be noise because of the way people move people there. But there was also, within those layers of noise, good data. And we captured that data. And over the last 7 years, we've been cleaning data also, right? So to understand people and be able to do it really well, and for these companies to continue to renew their contracts with us and continue to engage with us because we come with innovative products on our platform, it's because we simplify these talent decisions for them. We make sure that we make sense of these decisions based on the data that we see on the inside. So that's a part of the journey, right? So that when we talk about how can we qualify and verify for culture and competence, this is a part of it.
Arjun, that makes a lot of sense. But then, so the kind of, I have two takeaways from this, right? Which again, I may or may not be right at this. One is that I definitely see that there's a huge issue in terms of how people construct rich 360 profiles of every candidate that they hire, and that is where you get better at by sort of changing the cues. Not, I wouldn't say cues, but by having better permutation and combinations of the kind of data sets that you construct to create that rich profile, so that it's better correlated not just to reducing attrition or increasing the success ratio, but also to the dollar value that's currently tied to hiring somebody, or even a CTC or compensation and all of those things. These are my two takeaways from this. One of the things I'm trying to, and again, I could be like super naive in asking this, right? And Nisha, you can also weigh in on this. One of the things which, I mean, I've also been at a place where I've had to hire people in the past, and one of the things which I did in terms of the diversity and inclusion aspect was that McKinsey has a very famous airport test. Like if I can assuming that Arjun and Varun are stranded in the airport for like 5 hours, we've got a layover, we have nothing to do, and phones are dead. Would I want to spend those 5 hours with him without potentially running away or killing him in that respect, right? And the way that I do my own, or I did my own airport test, was just go around the social media profile, see the kind of people that they interact with, essentially factor in the virtue signaling aspect, how they interact with each other, what kind of hobbies and interests they have, and if I could see that, hey, these people aren't rigid, they're open to trying out new things, they aren't super polarized in terms of their own opinions, then maybe I could bring a team player like him, because hey, if I could teach him a couple of things, or if I could just nudge him in the right direction, this guy would be my positive and more powerful beacon in the thing. So what I'm arriving at, Arjun, is that human instincts, right, which are developed over a period of time, and we ourselves have this own AI and uh, you know mental representation that we sort of form with every new experience. How does that factor in to everything that you're doing? Because I think in terms of the buying decision itself, right, what I feel is that people may be concerned and be asked about this in one way or another, right? That, hey, look, I mean, because AI always comes down to an ethical question. I feel like at some point it always does, because I think we're not ready for it yet as people. But then, given that it's slowly creeping in terms of algorithms, in terms of all of those things that are happening, people are naturally slowly getting used to it, but still a long way to go, I feel. What are your thoughts on this? Again, I hope I made any sense at all. I'm just trying to understand this better as well
one part
too.
is the enrichment part, which is absolutely right. And if I go into the airport test and look at all the other things that you talked about, so that you get this information, see, I think what the media that we connect with today in terms of all the digital stuff that we do and the instant gratification that we have has made our attention spans very short,
Oh yeah,
right?
totally.
So for us to have this attention to detail and our ability to sort of focus becomes very difficult even in a hiring process. So the moment you're providing inferences through maybe the information that you see on somebody's Facebook activity or Insta activity and correlating it to their LinkedIn activity and correlating it to their Git commits, then you're in a different zone, right? And if you can provide a reasoning, an explainability for that correlation, so people can understand if you're 3 out of 5, based on all of this, 3 out of 5 means fitment, right? Or 4 out of 5 means, expert, and whatever else, excellent on 5 out of 5. But to get that done is not easy. That's one thing where AI has to look at these bits of information, that bits of information, and start. And I'll tell you why. It's not just about the inability of AI to do it. If you look at it, it's not a very complex problem to go and pull all that information. It's processing power. And that processing power, albeit it's much more efficient than a human being could do to correlate this information and build patterns, and you can be excellently accurate at that, it still means that you have to process. So now what happens is, in a real hiring cycle, based on attention span and paucity of time, attention span can get solved based on, you're giving this information and the recruiter understands this star rating. For when you can have a rating based on the resume of the individual, and you can say, I want also on the social and professional links, I want a plus resume score, right? And they hit that. Now, for a single resume or 10 resumes out of 100 that they've got through an auto sourcing capability, that 10 resumes take you 25 minutes to recover that data. Now, the 25 minutes in reality is not a large amount of time when you're looking at quality candidates coming in. But the way the system has been designed in terms of how you want people to move through the system, the way people have been designed who are working on these systems, I think both if you join together, then all of this becomes, somebody is like, why is it's your system's not performing? It's taking, 3 minutes for each resume to process, but 3 minutes of going to all these pieces of information, correlating it, cross-validating it, and coming back is nothing compared to the cost that you spend to hire. Now that ROI that you would calculate to bring it back to, say, the person who's the buyer, to say, you know what, I'm going to take 1 day off because I have to process, 15,000, job positions against, 100,000 resumes that come in, might seem like a lot. Maybe it'll take you 5-6 days because of the processing, right? But that's the problem, right? The paucity of time and the attention span of the individuals doing it. If you combine that, you still have a gap. You and I might, be credited to do a better job because we do this, with a little bit of direction. I can tell you today, I was looking at a product manager's position, and I was looking at product managers, and I was just looking at people who are from a B2C environment, and I wanted to see what they had done because I had a contact who reached out to me from a B2C environment. So I was looking at relationships, what companies do they work in, and what do they do, how do their trajectory goes. I mean, from that sense of it also, you're looking at a bunch of people, right? And you look at signals, right? You could look at an ISB or an IM, and you could look at all of that. But you also look at, okay, what have they really done? And it comes down to having a combination of, say, the LinkedIn information and the resume information and making sense of it, having a conversation with the individual. Parts of the process that you can make efficient, you make efficient and move on. Parts of the process that you can work on through an innovation lab to make that processing really fast, and then experiment with a set of customers, maybe 1 to 2, on saying, if I provide you this value, will you like it? Today, it's only providing you, throwing information in a pane that allows you to access those pieces of information that make sense because of paucity of time.
So essentially, we're trying to construct better and more accurate narratives, because right now what's happening is that even though all the information is available, it's there on pain, but the decision making, like you mentioned, right, it's left on the person. And that's where things need to drastically improve. When you're helping people make better decisions,
Right.
people decisions makes sense only, Arjun.
But Arjun, I'd like to flip this a little bit, right? We're talking about how this is going to help, and saving manas and time, and it's also going to do a lot in terms of intelligence. But let's talk a little bit about the other side. There's this whole fear. Every discussion on AI, is never complete till people don't talk about the fact that automation will always cause a certain kind of disruption, and the disruption that people see is job loss, right? Because immediately that's the one thing that happens, because also we are in a phase where we've not explored it so much to understand if a job is lost, what does it really create? What will AI, and how will AI rather benefit in the long run, right? So that is something that we're yet to see. So the question to you is really, how and what kind of roles do you think this kind of automation will create, and also how will it help offset this whole thing about not enough jobs being created, right? Because a lot, I mean, every day I keep reading reports about how much the number of white collar jobs are actually going down in the country. So what would be your take on that, please?
I think AI and I mean, various industries are witnessing the power of AI and deep learning. And according to a recent Gartner report, by 21 this year, 80% of emerging technologies, the foundation will be on AI. Right? Deep learning has sort of revolutionized many industries, and the automobile, retail, healthcare, gaming. Right? This is a company called Brains for Cars. It's a US-based company that's developed a deep learning system that can anticipate driver behavior 3.5 seconds before occurrence. So it's a great value when you look at safety, when you look at various aspects of being able to understand what the behavior of the individual is and giving them nudges so that you can associate things. I mean, we have it all over the world right now, right? And we look at the number of people that are transacting across Facebook, which is supposed to be a dated medium based on the gig workforce. But having said that, there's a tremendous number of people who get shaped in their buying decisions by what they transact on Facebook because of connected apps within your phone or your devices that translate from your laptop to your phone, and that connection is following you, right? And now that's one part of the facet of where we live and how we live, right? Now, is that going to shape the future of work? Of course it is, right? We've already seen the fourth industrial revolution and 50% of jobs vanishing. Well, what's coming, right? What are the kinds of jobs that are going to be available? Already with this, work from anywhere, work from home, everything has gone into hyper motion in terms of how you can start using multiple aspects of artificial intelligence automation that's available to you to deliver more value to where you are and how you are, right? You have more time on your hands, you have more ability to spend because your commute costs are less. You have various things that are benefits that are coming out of this because people are suddenly open to a way of life that is different. I also believe very strongly that we have to sort of connect with people, and that sense of being in a room and having this discussion is a lot better than a digital medium. But you know what? It saves us all these transaction costs that we have to have in the middle to make something happen that benefits the other person. Like somebody can be listening to this somewhere else in the world at their own time. What's the beauty of that? That continues now to be in hyper mode, where people now are going to access those mediums where they never access those mediums, right? Where cinema is accessed at the home suddenly becomes a steady state environment, right? Now, does that reshape in terms of the kinds of jobs that are available? Of course. And you're going to see it across the automobile industry. You're going to see it across cybersecurity is going to have jobs going through the roof, right? You're going to see it across gaming. You're going to see it across healthcare, right? So how does this reshape? So in healthcare, for instance, how many technology professionals are going to be hired to support the artificial intelligence that's going to be deployed? It's not just that you're going to take a machine which does some cool stuff within a hospital. These machines are going to have data that's going to have to have this data analyzed, normalized. It's going to have routine checks. So it's going to have professionals who understand the artificial intelligence that's contributed to building the machine to support the machine available. And these become the new jobs, right? And it's going to go into sales and marketing, right? Predictability of the kind of sales force you require to build better forecasts and hence better conversion is going to become the next mantra of how equipped you are to deal with CRM tools that have AI intelligence popping out into you based on conversion metrics of the past, right? Based on the individual or a group of individuals, right? So the sales rep and the marketing representatives are going to morph into how they can use artificial intelligence so they can navigate through their jobs. You're going to have, companies sort of in the automotive sector who are going to experiment through projects that will redefine how cars are going to work with people who own the vehicles, right? I mean, transportation itself is getting disrupted with autonomous vehicles. What are all those jobless drivers and who were driving trucks before do? Now, the essential part of that logistics is that it doesn't mean that the truck is going to go and deliver everything on its own through a pod, right? Where a robot is going to pick it up and do this. It also requires human engagement at some point in time to navigate through the process. So all these machines that are doing all of this information, transportation is efficient in the way it does it. So people are going to have to condition themselves to work on different jobs around the logistics and support of transportation and goods and services and manufacturing and automobile, creation. How do you look at the automotive industry translating in the new world, right? We've got electric vehicles already going through the roof. How does that translate? How do you look at Uber and Ola pivoting their models into the electric vehicle industry, right? So these things are going to create more jobs for a lot more technical jobs. And the technology jobs are going to be overwhelmingly important for people to cotton on to, which is why you see a lot of the upskilling, cross-skilling and reskilling initiatives within companies becoming of paramount importance to start catering to the digitization of these companies for the same outcomes of revenue and margin, same productivity and performance, but in a redefined manner.
Got it. So thanks for giving us and the listeners a direction of where we are headed. Really, Arjun, I think one of the things that we want to do through this conversation is to tell people also, right? Because upskilling and reskilling is an important conversation. It is an important discussion that CHROs are currently having. Uh, and especially with the pandemic and things like that. What you said about the future of work is something that I have been reading about as well, about cybersecurity, about all the different kinds of industries that will have an uptick. And also a lot of industries will kind of lose people because you realize that you need to digitize almost every aspect of a business for it to survive. We've only faced one pandemic, god knows what else. So
So,
completely.
In fact, I work in the Arjun, please, yeah.
no,
I'm
I
sorry,
was going
please.
to say you're going to lose people, but you're going to also gain them back because just think about it. AI in education, AI in financial services, AI in transportation is going to redefine the use of these people because of the medium being digitized. So they have to now work on content. They have to work on information transmission between devices and the pattern recognition. They work on labeling data. They'll work on understanding how UX is going to be created. They're going to have to redefine how you design products that are now software, right? Not really hardware and a consumer good necessarily to transmit. Now, let's think about it. It also means that you still require a bar of soap or a shower gel or toothpaste, right? I mean, that's not going to vanish, but that means that you're going to deliver it differently. You're going to support that delivery differently. And hence the jobs that used to manufacture them will be repositioned into another set of jobs that will emerge, right? And we've seen this also translating in when there were multiple evolutions of technology itself. It could be automobiles coming in to the fore. Would that mean that a lot of people who used to have horse carriages go out of jobs, right? What did that create? That created a different set of things that came in. What was from farming to manufacturing, what did that do? Did all the farmers lose their jobs? I mean, people still benefited from the efficiency that the distribution of the farming goods to more the channels became a lot more regularized, efficient for people to consume what was out on the farm better. countries morphed in terms of what they could provide and produce depending on where they stood in the entire journey, right? And I think that how you morph and how you would leverage the value of what you have as inherent quality within your country is going to be very important, and that's going to impact economic output. And I can tell you this, even in the US, out of $20 trillion, close to $2 trillion comes from technology jobs itself. They're looking at, that impact being in absolute numbers doubling by 2030. It's going to go to about 4.1 or $4.2 trillion just by the technology jobs providing an output that would affect the GDP by $4 trillion by 2030. And the difference is that it's going to go from, probably 10, 11% of the workforce to about 16%, right? And that's going to give you that doubling in impact. So it's going to be a lot, but it doesn't mean that all of the other companies sort of vanish in their form and fashion. And it's going to have its own ramifications. People still need to travel. People still need to stay in hotels. People still will want to have conferences, but you might have hybrid models that come up. You might have localized models that come out. But it's an opportunity to present how you could leverage technology depending on the state of the country, right? You might have an aging population. So what do? Are you going to have an immigrant population from India move there, or China move there, from Indonesia move to that? Possibly, that might be a way. Or you might automate a lot of the stuff where it's delivery that you could do efficiently locally, right? You might have a lot of support jobs that come in that allow, AI to sort of take over, and then maintenance of that AI is also done in a different fashion. That might happen.
Makes a lot of sense, Arjun. I think some of the things which I've also been, I'm from the CRM and sales industry as well, and I work with a company that builds a product that essentially helps salespeople ensure this sort of predictive behavior based on their conversations, based on they've been closing. And I definitely see that the way that things are going to go forward, right? It's going to be managers turning into coaches, sales leaders turning into having a proper 360 visibility on what's happening, what's not. Essentially, it's just because we live in the consumerization era and not so much as a production era anymore. The throughputs are increasing, wants are increasing, and you definitely have to meet those demands. And I think AI is definitely bridging the gap, especially in terms of agility and decision making, which I think have always been one of our biggest blind spots as a species, I feel. So Arjun, it's been great talking to you. This brings us to the close of this episode as well. Everyone, please, feel free sure to, leave your feedback for this episode in the newsletter as well. Be sure to subscribe. And, like me and Nisha have always said, please help us with your feedback. Do share it with your founders, CHROs and HRs as well, and your managers too, because it's everything in it for everyone to take out of these episodes. And if anybody wants to check out Arjun's product or wants to get in touch with Arjun, will be sure to leave all of his details in the newsletter. Feel free to drop him a hi as well. Thanks a lot. This was Nisha and Varun of the Edge podcast for CHROs. Thanks again. See you next week.